A town where everyone's got a script and nobody's telling the truth. There's only one thing more powerful than talent: perception. You ever notice that, huh? Guy can't act, can't write, can't even hold a damn coffee cup, right? But somehow, he's the next big thing. Yeah, welcome to Hollywood, sweetheart. Introducing the Hollywood Reputation Rewrite. The only all-in-one system designed to turn your complete disaster of a career into an award-winning illusion. What's in the box? Oh, I'm glad you asked. The Crisis Vanisher Spray. Got a scandal? Spray it once. Boom. Now it's a misunderstanding. The Paparazzi Summoner app. You don't chase fame anymore. Fame chases you. Even if you're just picking up a latte looking like a bum. The Method Acting Excuse Kit. Acting weird? Rude? Completely out of your mind? Relax. You're not unstable. You're committed to the craft. The award season whisperer. Dononasuri Mirene Marts. Don't worry about performances. We got relationships. A few dinners, a couple favors. Next thing you know, you're crying on stage holding a statue you didn't earn. Beautiful thing. The image rebrand button. One click. You go from problematic train wreck to the Rue du Morteau. Brave voice of a generation. Like magic. See, in this town, it ain't about what you did. It's about what people believe you did. So why leave your reputation to chance, huh? When you can control the narrative like a real professional. The Hollywood Reputation Rewrite. Because in Hollywood, the truth don't matter. But your publicist? Oh, that's everything. Side effects may include ego inflation, fake humility, sudden activism, mysterious accent changes, and an uncontrollable urge to thank your team. Hollywood, baby! Where even the lies got agents.
Pizzaverse Studios. A Palermo Productions original. Dorothy Kilgallen, Jack Ruby, and the notebook they buried. The television star who got too close to the JFK cover-up. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DePrio. Every Sunday night, 30 million Americans watch Dorothy Kilgallen smile in silk and diamonds. They had no idea the Queen of Television was carrying a death warrant in her purse. She had just used her massive fame to bypass the government and secure a closed-door confession from Jack Ruby. She held the notebook that would blow the JFK assassination wide open, but the spotlight is a deadly place to hide when you cross Carlos Marcello, the invisible king of the Southern Mafia. To him, she wasn't an icon. She was a dangerous liability. Marcello didn't send warnings. He sent professionals to execute her, stage a lonely overdose, and bury her investigation in a grave locked by a corrupt system for 60 years. The reporter in silk and diamonds. Dorothy Kilgallen was born on July 3, 1913, in Chicago, but she was raised in the cynical, fast-paced rhythm of New York newspaper rooms. Her father was a legendary newspaperman. She grew up breathing ink and tobacco smoke. She learned early that truth was rarely found in official press releases. It was found in whispered conversations in back alleys and sealed court documents. She started her career covering the glittering high society, but her mind was too sharp for mere gossip. She transitioned to crime. She covered the most sensational murder trials of the century. She sat in courtrooms analyzing the sweat on a killer's brow, the nervous twitch of a corrupt judge. She earned a reputation as a relentless bloodhound. The police respected her. The criminals feared her. She possessed an uncanny ability to read a room and spot a lie. Then she became a television star. The panel show brought her wealth and a level of fame reserved for movie idols. She lived in a 5-story Manhattan townhouse. She employed a butler. She wore designer couture. The public forgot the hard-boiled reporter and embraced the glamorous socialite. But Dorothy never lost her instincts. She used her celebrity as a master key. People lowered their guard around a television star. Cops wanted her autograph. Politicians wanted her endorsement. She used their vanity to extract information. She used her glamorous television persona as an invisible weapon, seamlessly infiltrating restricted political and criminal circles where traditional, hard-nosed reporters were completely locked out. The Invisible King of the South. 1,000 miles away in the humid, stagnant swamps of Louisiana, a different kind of empire thrived. Carlos Marcello did not care about television ratings. He cared about territory. He was the undisputed boss of the New Orleans crime family. His grip extended across Louisiana, Texas, and the entire Gulf Coast. He was not a flashy mobster like the men in New York or Chicago. He did not seek the front pages. He preferred the shadows. He operated out of a rustic motel in a sprawling swamp estate. He controlled judges, police chiefs, and local politicians. He ran a multi-billion-dollar enterprise of illegal gambling, extortion, and narcotics. He was the invisible king of the South. Marcello was a ruthless, cold-blooded operator. He demanded absolute loyalty. Betrayal was rewarded with a shallow grave in the bayou. He viewed the law as a minor inconvenience, a cost of doing business. He bought the men he could buy and eliminated the men he could not. His empire was secure until the Kennedy brothers took office. John F. Kennedy sat in the Oval Office. His brother, Robert F. Kennedy, took the position of Attorney General and declared a relentless war on organized crime. Bypassing the street-level thugs, he aimed his spear directly at the bosses, specifically targeting Carlos Marcello. The feud became personal. Robert Kennedy had Marcello kidnapped by federal agents. They grabbed him off the street, drove him to the airport, and illegally deported him to Guatemala. They dropped the most powerful mafia boss in the South into a jungle with nothing but the clothes on his back. It was a massive humiliation. Marcello clawed his way back to the United States. The journey took months through treacherous terrain. When he finally returned to Louisiana, he brought back a hatred for the Kennedys that bordered on madness. In the underworld, you do not humiliate a boss and live. Marcello held a secret meeting at his estate. He spoke the words that set the machinery of treason into motion. He said the president was a dog, and Robert Kennedy was the tail. If you cut off the tail, the dog keeps biting. But if you cut off the dog's head, the tail stops wagging. Suspicions of a dark alliance between organized crime and rogue intelligence elements began to take root among investigators, framing the assassination not as a lone act, but as a potentially coordinated strike. The shots in Dealey Plaza. November 22nd, 1963, the motorcade rolled through Dealey Plaza in Dallas. The shots echoed across the grassy knoll. The president's head exploded on national television. The world stopped. Within hours, the system began to construct the narrative. A man named Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. He was branded a lone nut, a disgruntled Marxist acting entirely on his own. The government machinery moved with suspicious speed to close the case. The media accepted the story. The public, traumatized and desperate for closure, swallowed the lie. Dorothy Kilgallen watched the television coverage from her townhouse in New York. She watched the police parade Oswald through the station. She saw the fear in his eyes. She heard him yell that he was a patsy. Her instincts flared. The story was too neat. The timeline was flawed. The police department in Dallas was notoriously corrupt, deeply infiltrated by Marcello's associates. The entire situation smelled like a staged production. Then came the execution. 2 days later, the Dallas police were transferring Oswald. A local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby stepped out of the crowd. He shoved a revolver into Oswald's stomach and pulled the trigger. The lone suspect was dead on live television. The government claimed Ruby was just a grieving citizen acting out of patriotic rage. Dorothy knew the Dallas underworld. She knew Jack Ruby was not a patriot. He was a low-level mob associate. He ran a strip club frequented by local cops and mobsters. He was a bagman for Carlos Marcello's organization. He owed money. He was a desperate man who followed orders. To Kilgallen, the truth seemed glaringly obvious. She suspected Ruby's actions were not driven by patriotic rage, but were instead part of a classic underworld cleanup operation designed to silence Oswald permanently. Dorothy goes to war. The United States government established the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination. It was a theater of the absurd. The commission was designed to validate the lone gunman theory, not to uncover the truth. They ignored witnesses who heard shots from the grassy knoll. They suppressed evidence. They refused to investigate the mafia connections. Dorothy went to war. She did not wait for the government to hand her a press release. She used her syndicated column to dismantle the official narrative piece by piece. She published articles that reached millions, pointing out the glaring contradictions in the police reports. She asked the questions no other journalist dared to ask. She publicly mocked the Warren Commission. She called their findings a blatant insult to the intelligence of the American people. The establishment grew nervous. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, monitored her. The CIA opened a file on her. The men in Washington expected the press to be compliant. They expected reporters to act as stenographers for the state. Dorothy Kilgallen was breaking rank. She was leading a one-woman insurgency against the most powerful institutions in the country. But writing columns from New York was not enough. Dorothy needed primary evidence. She needed to look the killer in the eye. The Jack Ruby Confession. When Jack Ruby went on trial in Dallas, Dorothy packed her bags. She left the safety of her high society life and flew directly into the hornet's nest. Dallas in 1964 was a city suffocating under a blanket of silence. The local police were hostile to outsiders. The courtroom was guarded like a military installation. Reporters from all over the world were corralled behind barriers. No one was allowed near Jack Ruby. The defense attorneys, the prosecutors, and the judge were all part of the same corrupt Texas ecosystem. They wanted a quick conviction and a closed file. Dorothy walked into the courthouse wearing a tailored suit and a string of pearls. The local cops recognized her immediately. They watched her on television every Sunday. They were starstruck. Dorothy used her celebrity with ruthless efficiency. She signed autographs. She smiled. She charmed the guards. She bypassed the hard-nosed political reporters who were locked out of the loop. During a recess, she approached Jack Ruby's defense attorney, Melvin Belli. She did not ask for a press conference. She demanded a private audience. Belli knew the power of Dorothy Kilgallen. He knew a favorable mention in her column could make a career. He brokered the deal. The judge cleared the room. The guards stepped back. Dorothy Kilgallen walked into a small windowless office. Jack Ruby was brought in. The door was shut. They were completely alone. No other journalist achieved this. It was a catastrophic breach of security for the men running the cover-up. Jack Ruby was a dead man walking. He knew he had been sacrificed by the mob. He was terrified. He knew that the local cops were on Marcello's payroll. He knew he could not speak the truth in open court without ensuring his own brutal murder. But sitting across from the glamorous television star from New York, Ruby broke. He saw someone from outside the Dallas machine. He saw someone with a megaphone large enough to reach the entire world. Dorothy opened her notebook. She clicked her pen. She looked at the sweating, trembling nightclub owner. She asked him who gave the order. The conversation lasted for hours. Dorothy wrote furiously. She documented the names. She mapped the connections between the Dallas police, the local mob, and the vast criminal empire of Carlos Marcello. She wrote down the details of the conspiracy that the Warren Commission was working so hard to bury. Ruby spilled his guts. He traded the greatest secret of the 20th century for a sympathetic ear. When Dorothy walked out of that room, her demeanor had changed. The elegant socialite was gone. She was carrying a ticking time bomb. The notebook. She clutched her purse tightly against her body. She flew back to New York. She locked the notebook in a secure file. She began to tell her closest friends that she had solved the case. She whispered to fellow journalists that the official story was a massive fraud. She stated she was writing a book that would expose the men who murdered the president. She was gathering the final pieces of evidence before publishing the explosive truth. She felt invincible. She believed her fame protected her. She believed that they would not dare touch a star of her magnitude. She severely underestimated the ruthlessness of the system. Carlos Marcello did not care about television stars. To him, anyone who threatened the syndicate was a pest that needed extermination. The word traveled from Dallas to New Orleans. The television lady knew too much. She had the notebook. She had the names. She was preparing to broadcast the conspiracy to the world. The order was given. The machinery of death shifted its focus from Texas to Manhattan. The countdown in Manhattan. The mafia did not send street thugs to deal with a high-profile target. They sent professionals. They required a hit that left no fingerprints, a murder that looked like a tragedy. They needed to silence the voice, steal the evidence, and walk away without triggering a federal investigation. Dorothy Kilgallen continued her life unaware that the countdown had begun. She attended cocktail parties. She sat on the television panel, smiling her million-dollar smile, wearing her diamonds. She worked late into the night in her townhouse, typing the manuscript that she believed would change history. She was alone in a house of secrets, surrounded by an invisible net that was tightening with every passing day. The notebook felt heavy. It was just paper and ink, but it carried the weight of a murdered president. Dorothy Kilgallen placed it on her mahogany desk in her Manhattan townhouse. The sounds of New York City drifted through the thick glass windows. Cabs honked. Sirens wailed. It was a world away from the stifling heat of Dallas, but the danger had followed her home. She locked the notebook in a drawer. She poured a drink, acutely aware of the severe risks involved in challenging the official narrative of a presidential assassination. When the weekend arrived, the transformation was absolute. The makeup artist powdered her face to hide the exhaustion. The stylist adjusted her pearls. She walked onto the set of What's My Line and delivered her signature smile. She bantered with Bennett Cerf and Arlene Francis. She was witty. She was sharp. She was the picture of mid-century elegance. The studio audience applauded, completely unaware that the woman sitting before them was holding a live grenade. The contrast was suffocating. She was living two separate lives. In the light, she was a beloved entertainer. In the dark, she was a hunted investigator. The men in the dark. She began to write. She typed late into the night, compiling the notes from her session with Jack Ruby. She connected the dots. She mapped the network. The official story claimed Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone communist sympathizer. Dorothy's notes proved otherwise. Her investigation revealed a web of right-wing extremists, rogue intelligence agents, and mafia hitmen. They all intersected in New Orleans and Dallas. They all operated under the shadow of Carlos Marcello. Marcello ruled his empire from a sprawling estate called Churchill Farms outside New Orleans. He presented himself as a simple tomato salesman. He was a billionaire extortionist. He despised the Kennedy family. John F. Kennedy had appointed his brother Robert as Attorney General. Robert Kennedy made it his personal mission to destroy organized crime. He humiliated Marcello. Attorney General Robert Kennedy had Marcello abruptly deported to Guatemala. This aggressive legal maneuver significantly escalated the hostilities between the Justice Department and organized crime, cementing a deep-seated animosity. Dorothy knew this. She knew the men she was investigating were butchers. They dissolved bodies in acid. They buried enemies in the foundations of casinos. But she believed her status made her immune. She was a household name. If anything happened to her, it would trigger a national uproar. She relied on her fame as a bulletproof vest. It was a fatal miscalculation. Fame only protects you from street thugs. It does not protect you from a systemic conspiracy. The men in the shadows did not want a national uproar. They did not want a martyr. A bullet through the head in a dark alley would raise too many questions. It would validate her investigation. It would prove she was right. They needed her death to look ordinary. They needed it to look like a tragedy brought on by her own flaws. They needed a weapon that left no smoke and no noise. They chose poison. The staged overdose. The 1960s was the golden age of prescription sedatives. Barbiturates were handed out by doctors like candy. Housewives took them to sleep. Executives took them to relax. Seconal, tuinal, nembutal. They were highly addictive and extremely dangerous when mixed with alcohol. A deliberate overdose was the perfect cover for murder. It was clean. It was quiet. It allowed the police to close the file without an investigation. The syndicate dispatched professionals to New York. They did not rush. They studied their target. They watched Dorothy's townhouse. They learned her schedule. They knew what time she left for the television studio. They knew what time she returned. They mapped the entrances and exits of her 5-story home. They gathered intelligence on her habits. They knew she liked to mix a cocktail in the evening. They knew she occasionally took a sleeping pill. They built a psychological profile of their victim to ensure the stage scene would look completely authentic. Dorothy began to sense the net tightening. She was a veteran reporter. She knew when she was being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up when she walked down Fifth Avenue. She saw men in dark suits standing across the street from her house. They did not approach her. They just watched. They wanted her to know they were there. It was a psychological warfare tactic designed to induce panic. The telephone became a source of terror. She picked up the receiver and heard the distinct click of a wiretap. The line would go dead. She would receive calls in the middle of the night. No one spoke. There was only the sound of heavy breathing on the other end. She stopped discussing the investigation on the phone. She knew J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI were monitoring her. Hoover hated her. She had criticized him in her column. She was entirely alone. November 7th, 1965. The paranoia seeped into her bones. She started carrying the Jack Ruby notebook with her everywhere. She did not trust her own safe. She clutched her purse tightly when she walked into restaurants. She looked over her shoulder when she hailed a cab. The glamorous smile she wore on television became forced. The bags under her eyes grew darker. She was exhausted. The burden of the truth was crushing her. She made a critical error. She confided in the wrong people. She needed an outlet. She needed to share the immense pressure she was under. She went to cocktail parties and whispered to her colleagues in the press. She told them she had the biggest story of the century. She boasted that she was going to blow the JFK assassination wide open. She told her makeup artist that if the wrong people knew what she knew, it would cost her her life. She thought she was buying insurance. She had named names. She had documented the money trail. She had outlined the exact mechanism of the conspiracy. The book would trigger congressional hearings. It would force the Justice Department to act. It would bring the entire Cosa Nostra structure crashing down. She was playing a high-stakes game of poker with men who owned the casino. Her boast did not deter them. They accelerated the timeline. The syndicate realized she was close to publishing. She had secured a lucrative book deal with Random House. The manuscript was coming together. She had named names. She had documented the money trail. She had outlined the exact mechanism of the conspiracy. The book would trigger congressional hearings. It would force the Justice Department to act. It would bring the entire Cosa Nostra structure crashing down. Marcello gave the final nod. The operation moved from surveillance to execution. The killers moved into position in Manhattan. They did not look like mobsters from a Hollywood movie. They wore tailored suits. They carried briefcases. They blended perfectly into the affluent Upper East Side neighborhood where Dorothy lived. They were ghosts. They knew the layout of the townhouse. They knew the security vulnerabilities. They knew exactly how to bypass the locks without leaving a scratch on the brass. They waited for the perfect moment. They needed a night when Dorothy was vulnerable. They needed a night when her guard was down. The calendar turned to November 1965. The air in New York turned cold and brittle. The leaves in Central Park died and fell to the ground. Dorothy felt a sense of urgency. The second anniversary of the Kennedy assassination was approaching. She wanted to release the truth. She worked feverishly on the manuscript. She drank heavily to calm her nerves. The alcohol dulled her sharp edges. It made her sloppy. It made her vulnerable. Attending a high society party, she projected power and confidence, looking every bit the woman who owned the world. But inside, she remained a terrified prisoner of her own investigation. Returning home, she locked the heavy oak door of her townhouse, desperately hoping the thick walls of her fortress could keep the darkness out. She did not know the darkness was already inside. November 7th, 1965. The air in Manhattan was freezing. Dorothy Kilgallen stepped out of the television studio and into a waiting car. She had just finished a live broadcast of What's My Line? She had smiled for the cameras. She had traded jokes with the panel. She had worn the diamonds and the silk. She had performed her duty as the queen of American television. The car glided through the dark streets toward her townhouse on East 68th Street. She leaned her head against the cold window. She was exhausted. The glamorous facade was heavy. The fear was heavier. She carried the Jack Ruby notebook in her purse. It felt like a block of lead. She knew she was being hunted. She just did not know the hunters were already waiting. She arrived at the townhouse. She unlocked the heavy front door. She walked inside. The house was silent. Her husband, Richard, was sleeping in another room. They lived separate lives under the same roof. Their marriage was a hollow arrangement. A polite fiction maintained for the society columns. She was entirely alone. She walked into the living room. She poured herself a drink. It was a ritual to calm her nerves. A way to wash away the adrenaline of the live broadcast and the creeping dread of the assassination investigation. She did not know that the drink would be her last. She did not know that the safety of her secure fortress had already been breached by the assassins waiting quietly in the dark. The execution. The professionals moved with absolute silence. The intruders left no shattered glass or forced doors. Armed with keys and unrestricted access, they moved through the townhouse undetected. They stepped out of the darkness. There was no struggle. There was no desperate fight for survival. The men sent by Carlos Marcello were not street brawlers. They were technicians of death. They knew Dorothy was a fighter. They knew a physical altercation would leave bruises, broken nails, and torn clothing. A struggle would trigger a homicide investigation. They needed a clean slate. They needed a suicide. They used chemistry. The official autopsy revealed a lethal combination of alcohol and 3 distinct barbiturates: secobarbital, amobarbital, and pentobarbital. Independent toxicologists and investigators later argued that this specific complex chemical mixture strongly suggested foul play rather than an accidental or self-inflicted overdose. The crime scene itself presented glaring anomalies. Kilgallen was found in a secondary guest bedroom she rarely used, wearing a nightgown that friends stated did not belong to her. Her body was arranged in an unnaturally rigid posture, with her arms positioned perfectly straight by her sides, suggesting the scene had been artificially staged to mimic a peaceful death. Then they added the props. They took a book and placed it on her chest. It was a visual cue for the police. A silent narrative suggesting she had been reading in bed, felt tired, and passed away quietly. They made a mistake. They placed the book upside down. They made another mistake. Dorothy had terrible eyesight. She could not read a menu without her thick reading glasses. The killers did not know this intimate detail. They left the glasses in another room. They staged a scene of a woman reading an upside-down book without the visual aid required to see the pages. It was a sloppy error in an otherwise flawless operation, a crack in the facade that screamed murder to anyone paying attention. But the killers knew they did not need a perfect scene. They only needed a scene good enough for a corrupt system to rubber stamp. They killed the truth. With the body arranged, the assassins turned to their primary objective. They were not there for jewelry. They ignored the expensive art on the walls. They bypassed the cash in her wallet. They were bloodhounds sniffing for paper. They went to her desk. They went to her safe. They went to her purse. They found the Jack Ruby notebook. They found the thick, heavily annotated file containing years of research on the Kennedy assassination. They found the names, the dates, the connections to New Orleans, the connections to Carlos Marcello, the connections to the rogue intelligence agents. They gathered every scrap of paper related to the conspiracy. They stripped her legacy clean. They erased her work. They took the evidence that would have blown the country apart and shoved it into their briefcases. By removing the files, they did not just kill Dorothy Kilgallen. They killed the truth. They ensured that her voice would be silenced forever. The mafia acted as a ruthless collection agency, seizing the collateral on a debt she never knew she owed. The debt was her life, paid in exchange for staring too closely at the architects of the American underworld. The killers walked out of the townhouse. They locked the door behind them. They dissolved into the cold Manhattan night. They left behind a meticulously curated crime scene and a corpse that was already growing cold. Shut it down. The heavy boots of the New York Police Department patrolmen scuffed the pristine hardwood floors of the townhouse. They walked through the corridors of wealth with a casual, devastating indifference. This was a crime scene of monumental historical importance, yet it was treated with the routine apathy of a vagrant dying in an alley. The patrolmen did not secure the perimeter. They did not string yellow tape across the bedroom door. They did not prevent family members, friends, or domestic staff from wandering through the rooms. They trampled over evidence. They contaminated the space. They acted exactly as a police force acts when a decision has already been made from above. Detectives from the local precinct arrived. They were seasoned men who had seen hundreds of homicides. They possessed the training to read a room. They stood in the doorway of the small guest bedroom and surveyed the tableau. They saw the rigid posture of the corpse. They saw the nightgown that did not match the glamorous wardrobe hanging in the master suite. They saw the book resting perfectly on her chest. A rookie detective might have stepped forward and noted that the book was upside down. He might have asked where the victim's reading glasses were. He might have questioned why a woman who owned a sprawling, luxurious master bedroom would choose to end her life in a cramped, unheated guest room she despised. But these were not rookies. These were veterans of a corrupt ecosystem. They recognized the signature of a professional hit. They recognized the staging. More importantly, they recognized the unspoken boundaries of their job. You do not ask questions that lead to answers you cannot handle. You do not initiate a homicide investigation into the death of a national icon without authorization from the highest levels of the department. And that authorization was explicitly denied. The telephone in the townhouse rang. It was answered by a ranking officer. The voice on the other end delivered a directive. The directive was simple: shut it down, pack it up, move the body. Within an hour, the narrative was locked in place. The cover-up machine. The sun rose over New York City on November 8, 1965. The city woke up completely unaware that one of its brightest lights had been extinguished. The traffic roared to life. The newspapers hit the stands. Dorothy's syndicated column appeared in print that very morning, a ghost speaking from the grave. At mid-morning, the doorbell rang at the townhouse. It was her personal hairdresser arriving for scheduled appointment. The butler let him in. The house was quiet. The hairdresser walked upstairs to the master bedroom. It was empty. The bed had not been slept in. He walked down the hall. He noticed the door to the guest bedroom was ajar. He pushed it open. He saw Dorothy lying in the bed. He saw the strange nightgown. He saw the bizarre, rigid posture. He saw the upside-down book resting on her chest. He called her name. She did not move. He stepped closer. Her skin was pale and waxy. She was not breathing. He screamed. The scream shattered the silence of the townhouse. The butler came running. The police were called. The machinery of the state geared up to respond. Patrol cars wailed down the street. Detectives swarmed the property. Flashbulbs illuminated the dark corners of the house. The first officers on the scene looked at the body. They looked at the pills on the nightstand. They looked at the peaceful arrangement of the corpse. They did not secure the perimeter. They did not dust for fingerprints. They did not treat the townhouse as a homicide scene. They looked at the upside-down book and the missing glasses, and they chose to see nothing. They saw a wealthy, stressed television star who had taken too many pills after a long night of drinking. They saw exactly what the killers wanted them to see. They saw exactly what the system needed them to see. The cover-up had begun. The autopsy lie. The detectives did not dust the nightstand for fingerprints. They did not dust the doorknobs. They did not interview the neighbors to ask if they had seen strange men in tailored suits watching the house the night before. They did not ask the husband, who was supposedly sleeping just down the hall, why he heard nothing. They simply declared the scene secure, called the morgue, and began drafting a preliminary report that classified the death as an apparent suicide or accidental overdose. The speed of the cover-up was terrifying. It required absolute coordination between the local police, the medical examiner, and the federal intelligence agencies. The mafia executed the hit, but the United States government provided the broom to sweep it up. The body of Dorothy Kilgallen was zipped into a black bag and carried out of the townhouse. The flashing lights of the ambulances and police cruisers reflected off the damp Manhattan asphalt. A crowd of reporters had already gathered behind the police barricades. They were hungry for a story. They wanted the gruesome details of a celebrity tragedy. The police spokesman stepped up to the microphones. He fed them the script. He told the press that there was no sign of foul play. He suggested she had died of natural causes or tragic mix of alcohol and sleeping pills. He planted the seed of the depressed, aging starlet. The journalists, men who had feared her intellect and envied her power just yesterday, eagerly swallowed the lie. They rushed to the nearest payphones. The evening editions went to print with headlines announcing the tragic passing of a television queen. They erased her investigative journalism. They erased her relentless pursuit of the Kennedy assassins. They reduced a brilliant, dangerous mind to a fragile, emotional stereotype. The media establishment, desperate to maintain their access to police sources and government officials, actively participated in the character assassination of their own colleague. They traded the truth for a front-page scoop. While the press spun the narrative, the true horror of the cover-up was taking place in the cold, sterile rooms of the city morgue. The autopsy of Dorothy Kilgallen was a masterclass in medical deception. The initial examination was assigned to Dr. James Luke. He was a competent medical examiner. He drew the blood. He analyzed the tissue samples. He sent the fluids to the toxicology lab in Brooklyn. The toxicologist, a meticulous scientist, ran the tests. The results were startling. The blood did not just contain a fatal level of alcohol and a generic sleeping pill. The blood was saturated with 3 distinct heavy barbiturates: secobarbital, amobarbital, pentobarbital. The toxicologist knew exactly what he was looking at. This was a chemical execution. No civilian accidentally ingests a perfectly calibrated fatal mixture of 3 different central nervous system depressants. This was the work of a specialist. The toxicologist prepared to flag the report. He prepared to alert the homicide division that they had a murder on their hands. He was silenced. The chief medical examiner of New York City, Dr. Milton Halpern, stepped in. Halpern was an institution. He wielded massive power. He knew the political ramifications of declaring Dorothy Kilgallen a murder victim. He knew it would rip the scab off the Kennedy assassination. He knew it would trigger congressional inquiries that could expose the dark alliance between the intelligence community and organized crime. Halpern took control of the file. He suppressed the detailed toxicology report. He buried the evidence of the 3 distinct barbiturates. He issued a final official ruling that was vague, sterile, and entirely misleading. He declared the cause of death to be acute ethanol and barbiturate intoxication. Circumstances undetermined. He gave the system exactly what it needed. Silence from Washington. By ruling the circumstances undetermined, he absolved the police of the responsibility to investigate. He gave the insurance companies a reason to pay out the life insurance policy. He gave the public a tragic but mundane explanation. He rubber-stamped a mafia hit with the official seal of the city of New York. Hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C., J. Edgar Hoover sat behind his massive desk at the FBI headquarters. A subordinate handed him a memo. The memo confirmed the death of Dorothy Kilgallen. Hoover read the paper. His face remained an unreadable mask. He did not ask for an investigation. He did not offer federal assistance to the New York police. He simply filed the memo away. Hoover had despised Dorothy. She had publicly questioned the competence of his bureau. She had ridiculed the Warren Commission, a report Hoover had helped engineer to pacify the nation. Her death was not a tragedy for the FBI. It was the removal of a massive tactical obstacle. Hoover understood the value of a dead problem. The silence from Washington was deafening. It was a tacit endorsement of the murder. 1,000 miles in the opposite direction, the humid air of Louisiana clung to the sprawling estate of Churchill Farms. Carlos Marcello sat on his porch. He ate a plate of pasta. He drank a glass of heavy red wine. An associate handed him a newspaper. The headline announced the death of the famous television star. Marcello glanced at the photo of Dorothy Kilgallen's smiling face. He showed no emotion. He did not celebrate. He did not gloat. To the boss of the Southern Mafia, murder was not a passionate affair. It was accounting. A ledger had been unbalanced. A civilian had threatened the stability of the enterprise. An order was given. A life was subtracted to fix the math. Marcello folded the newspaper and returned, bearing a national secret. The silence became a contagion. Dorothy's closest friends, the men and women who had heard her boast about the explosive JFK evidence at cocktail parties just weeks prior, suddenly developed collective amnesia. They stopped talking about her investigation. When asked by reporters, they shook their heads and spoke about how overworked she was. They spoke about the pressure of television. They provided alibis for the killers. The socialites of New York realized that the glamorous world they lived in was built on a fragile truce with monsters. If the monsters could reach into a locked townhouse and execute the queen of television, no one was safe. Fear sealed their lips. The funeral was a grand, hypocritical spectacle. The cameras rolled. The celebrities arrived in dark sunglasses and black mink coats. The church was packed with the elite of American media and high society. They wept for the cameras. They delivered eulogies about her sharp wit and her radiant smile. They spoke about the tragedy of a life cut short by the immense pressures of fame. No one spoke about Jack Ruby. No one spoke about Carlos Marcello. No one spoke about the upside-down book or the 3 barbiturates. They lowered the casket into the ground. They threw dirt on the wood. They were not just burying a woman, they were burying a national secret. They were burying the uncomfortable truth that the United States was a country where a mafia boss could order the execution of a superstar journalist. And the police, the medical establishment, and the federal government would happily hold the shovel. The system had functioned perfectly. The threat was neutralized. The evidence was destroyed. The public was pacified. The silence of the living. Back in Manhattan, the realization of what had truly happened began to dawn on the people closest to Dorothy. Her husband, Richard, walked through the empty townhouse. He saw the police leave. He saw the chalk outline on the guest bed. Then he went to her private study. He looked at the desk. He looked at the safe. He realized the Jack Ruby notebook was missing. He realized the massive, heavy file containing years of primary research, witness names, and Dallas police connections had vanished. The killers had not just taken her life, they had cleaned the house. Richard felt a cold, paralyzing terror grip his spine. He knew his wife had not committed suicide. He knew she had been silenced. He knew the men who took the files were the same men who had murdered the president. He stood in the quiet study and faced a brutal choice. He could go to the press. He could go to the rogue elements of the police who were not on the payroll. He could demand an investigation into the missing documents. He could scream the truth from the rooftops, or he could remain silent and stay alive. He chose silence. He chose his own life. He chose the safety of his children over justice for his wife. He did not report the missing files to the authorities. He did not challenge the medical examiner's report. He accepted the tragic suicide narrative. He played the role of the grieving, confused widower perfectly. It was the ultimate domestic betrayal, a surrender born of absolute fear. He knew that the system that killed Dorothy would not hesitate to kill him if he stepped out of line. The mafia did not just assassinate a journalist, they assassinated the courage of everyone around her. The empty chair. The Sunday after the murder, the television network faced a problem. It was not a moral problem. It was a scheduling problem. What's My Line had an empty chair on the panel. The producers did not cancel the broadcast. They did not dedicate the hour to investigative journalism. They hired a replacement. The cameras rolled. The audience clapped. The laughter track played over the ghost of Dorothy Kilgallen. The show went on. That is the most brutal law of the entertainment machine. It does not stop for a corpse. It simply wipes the blood off the gears, adjusts the lighting, and cues the next smiling face. Her husband moved out of the townhouse. He packed the expensive furniture. He took the children. He took the silence. He never spoke of the missing files. He never challenged the police report. He never hired a private investigator. He lived the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. He was a man who had traded his wife's legacy for a quiet, terrified existence. The townhouse was sold to strangers. The new owners scrubbed the floors. They painted the walls. They erased the physical footprint of the woman who almost toppled an empire. Character assassination. The erasure of her professional reputation took slightly longer, but it was executed with the same ruthless efficiency. The intelligence agencies did not just want Dorothy dead. They wanted her discredited. A dead martyr inspires followers. A dead drunk is easily dismissed. Whispers were planted in the press by federal agents. Blind items appeared in the gossip columns. They suggested she was unstable. They claimed she was a severe alcoholic who could not handle the pressure of television. They said she was paranoid, obsessed, and ultimately cracked under the weight of her own delusions. The establishment biographers picked up the sanitized narrative. They reduced a trailblazing, fearless journalist to a cautionary tale of celebrity excess. They buried her intellect under a pile of empty martini glasses and scattered sleeping pills. The public, conditioned to believe the news anchors and the government spokesman, accepted the revisionist history. They forgot the reporter who cornered Jack Ruby. They remembered the tragic socialite who took too many pills. The character assassination was as precise and lethal as the physical assassination. The files go south. Carlos Marcello watched the erasure from the humid sanctuary of his Louisiana swamp estate. He did not need to issue any more orders. The system was doing the heavy lifting for him. The government and the media, the two institutions designed to protect the truth, were actively shoveling dirt onto Dorothy's grave. Marcello understood the cold mechanics of power. If you make the truth look crazy, the public will beg for the lie. He had successfully protected his syndicate. He had protected the conspirators in Dallas. He remained the untouchable king of the South. He was a phantom pulling the strings of American history while eating pasta on a porch. Dorothy had believed her fame was a weapon. She thought the television cameras gave her armor. She did not realize that fame is just a loan from the public, and the underworld operates its own bank. When she stepped out of the glamorous Hollywood circles and walked into the violent machinery of the Cosa Nostra, she signed a contract she could not read. She took their secrets. She threatened their survival. The mafia viewed this as theft. The assassination was not a crime of passion. It was a foreclosure. They came to her townhouse to collect a debt. They took the files as collateral. They took her life as payment. The stolen notebook did not stay in New York. The men in the tailored suits who walked out of Dorothy Kilgallen's townhouse did not keep souvenirs. They were couriers in a supply chain of death. They handed the leather-bound book and the thick investigative files to a bagman. The bagman boarded a flight heading south. Within 48 hours, the only existing record of Jack Ruby's private confession was sitting on a heavy wooden desk at Churchill Farms in Louisiana. The exact fate of Dorothy's files remains one of the great mysteries of the assassination. Evidence strongly suggests the notebook and the drafted manuscript were swiftly transported out of New York, delivered directly to the architects of the conspiracy, and permanently destroyed, erasing her meticulous timeline of the Dallas cover-up forever. That was the true death of Dorothy Kilgallen. The physical murder in Manhattan stopped her heart. The destruction of her life's work erased her voice. Vindication too late. Years passed. The illusion of the 1960s shattered into a nightmare of violence. Robert Kennedy, the man who had deported Marcello and sparked the blood feud, was shot dead in a hotel kitchen in Los Angeles. Martin Luther King Jr. was gunned down on a motel balcony in Memphis. The country tore itself apart. The paranoia that Dorothy had felt isolated inside her townhouse became the national mood. The public slowly began to realize that the government was lying to them. The Warren Commission report was exposed as a sanitized fairy tale. Congressional committees were eventually formed to re-examine the assassinations. They concluded that there was a high probability of a conspiracy. They pointed fingers at the mafia. They pointed fingers directly at Carlos Marcello. It was the ultimate vindication. Dorothy had been right. She had known the truth a decade before anyone else. She had held the answers in her hands in 1964. But she was not there to see the validation. She was buried in a cemetery in New York, silenced by the very men the government was finally forced to investigate. The hearings changed nothing. Key witnesses suffered mysterious accidents before they could testify. Crucial evidence disappeared from federal vaults. The system protected itself. Marcello never spent a single day in prison for the murder of the president. He never faced a judge for the execution of Dorothy Kilgallen. The tragedy of Dorothy Kilgallen is not just that she was murdered. It is that her murder was entirely successful. It achieved exactly what it was designed to achieve. It stopped the publication of the truth. It terrified the people around her into absolute submission. It proved that the illusion of freedom is only maintained as long as you do not threaten the architects of the illusion. Dorothy stepped outside the permitted boundaries. She thought she was the puppet master of public opinion. She discovered too late that she was just a pawn on a board, controlled by men who wrote the rules in blood. She looked at the monsters in the dark, and the monsters reached out and pulled her in. She was stripped of her voice and her dignity, left in a meticulously staged room that seemingly mocked the investigative process of the authorities. Time, the great weapon. Decades rolled by, and the effectiveness of the cover-up only grew stronger. Time is the greatest weapon of any conspiracy. Time degrades evidence. Time buries witnesses. Time turns outrage into apathy. In the 1970s, independent researchers and investigative authors began to dig into the Kennedy assassination using the newly established Freedom of Information Act. They began to look for the missing pieces. They inevitably stumbled upon the strange, sudden death of the television star who had interviewed Jack Ruby. They filed requests for Dorothy's autopsy reports. The New York Police Department and the medical examiner's office stonewalled them. When documents were finally released, they were heavily redacted. Crucial details were missing. The glass from which she supposedly drank the lethal cocktail was never catalogued into evidence. The original crime scene photographs were missing from the archives. The police had not just swept the crime scene under the rug, they had burned the rug. The system protected its own lies with a bureaucratic fortress. You cannot solve a murder when the men guarding the evidence are the same men who helped hide the body. The media, the institution Dorothy had dedicated her life to, was complicit in her erasure. The newspapers she had worked for printed retrospectives of the golden age of television. They showed archival footage of What's My Line. They showed Dorothy laughing, wearing her diamonds, making witty remarks. They weaponized her smile against her legacy. If you show a woman smiling enough, the public refuses to believe she was terrified. The smile became the ultimate cover-up. The television networks reduced her to a trivia question, a glamorous footnote in the history of broadcasting. They stripped away her grit. They ignored the fact that she was a hard-boiled crime reporter who possessed the courage to walk into a Texas jail cell when the rest of the press corps was hiding behind official government statements. The illusion of Hollywood and television fame demands a happy ending, or at least a glamorous tragedy. A lonely starlet taking too many pills fits the narrative. A brilliant investigative journalist executed by the mafia with the tacit approval of the federal government shatters the narrative. The public chose the comfortable lie. They wanted to keep their television sets tuned to entertainment. They did not want to look at the blood seeping under the studio door. Marcello dies in his bed. Carlos Marcello aged comfortably in his kingdom. The man who orchestrated the murder of a president and the assassination of a superstar was never held accountable for either crime. He faced no tribunals. He faced no firing squads. In the 1980s, the federal government finally managed to indict him, but not for the blood on his hands. They caught him in a sting operation known as Brylab, involving bribery and insurance kickbacks. It was a minor administrative charge compared to his actual ledger of atrocities. He was sent to a federal medical prison. He did not suffer the sharp, terrifying realization of his own mortality like his victims did. He developed severe Alzheimer's disease. His brain rotted away inside his skull. The man who held the darkest, most dangerous secrets of the 20th century simply forgot them. He forgot Dallas. He forgot the hitmen. He forgot the television star in the Manhattan townhouse. He was released to his family due to his failing health. On March 2nd, 1993, Carlos Marcello died in his own bed in his own mansion in Metairie, Louisiana. He was 83 years old. He was surrounded by his children and grandchildren. He died a peaceful death. The stark reality of the era was that justice remained unbalanced. The architects of the conspiracy survived and thrived, shielded by their massive financial leverage and a government willing to look the other way. The mafia functioned exactly as it was designed to function, utilizing extreme violence to protect its interests. Marcello died in luxury. Dorothy Kilgallen died in terror. The scales of justice were never balanced. They were rigged from the start. The last lesson. Dorothy had lived 52 years from her birth on July 3, 1913, to her murder on November 8, 1965. She built an empire of words. She thought she understood power because she understood fame. She believed that her visibility was a shield. She believed the public would not allow a star of her magnitude to be extinguished without a riot. She misunderstood the nature of the beast. Kilgallen may have believed her high public profile offered a degree of protection. However, the syndicates she was investigating operated outside the boundaries of public accountability, viewing any threat to their survival with lethal pragmatism. The men who killed her did not care about her Nielsen ratings. They did not care about her Hollywood friends. To them, she was not a queen. She was a liability. She was a loose end. The mafia views human beings as assets or obstacles. Dorothy became an obstacle. She thought she was an independent operator investigating a crime. The syndicate viewed her as a trespasser on their property. They mocked her. They silenced her. They demonstrated that the power of the press is an illusion if the press is not willing to bleed for the story. Dorothy was willing to bleed, but she was entirely alone. The rest of the media establishment retreated. They saw what happened to the woman who asked the wrong questions, and they collectively decided to stop asking. The staged overdose in the Manhattan townhouse was a warning shot fired across the bow of American journalism. The message was received. The press backed off the mafia. They backed off the intelligence agencies. They surrendered their role as watchdogs and became lapdogs. The 1960s was an era defined by brutal, unpunished violence, where the men who ran the country were often indistinguishable from the men who ran the rackets. The story of Dorothy Kilgallen strips away the myth of the untouchable celebrity, illustrating the stark reality that immense public visibility does not guarantee safety. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality that power does not reside in front of the camera. Power resides in the dark rooms where decisions are made about who lives and who dies. Dorothy Kilgallen was not a flawless hero. She was ambitious. She was privileged. She enjoyed the trappings of her wealth. But when she was confronted with the greatest lie in modern history, she did not look away. She did not take the easy path. She used her platform to challenge a monstrous machine. She walked into a Texas jail cell and looked a killer in the eye. She wrote down the truth, knowing the risks, and she paid for it with her last breath. Dorothy Kilgallen's enduring legacy is inextricably tied to her missing investigative files. The sudden disappearance of her research on the Kennedy assassination remains one of the most heavily debated aspects of her case, fundamentally overshadowing her extensive career in traditional journalism. The enduring mystery of her final days continues to serve as a stark reminder of the dangerous intersection between power, truth, and those willing to suppress it. Dorothy Kilgallen was not killed because she was reckless. She was killed because she was effective. She used the smile, the silk, the diamonds, the television fame, and the social access to get closer to the truth than the government ever wanted anyone to get. She stepped past the press releases, past the official statements, past the staged theater of the Warren Commission, and she walked straight into the machinery, hiding behind it. What she found was not just a killer. It was a system. A system of mob power, political fear, corrupted policing, suppressed evidence, obedient media, and institutions willing to help bury a woman if it meant protecting the larger lie. The notebook vanished. The files vanished. The truth was dragged south in a briefcase and fed into the dark. But the ghost never left. Because every time her name comes back, every time the upside-down book gets mentioned, every time the missing glasses, the missing files, the 3 barbiturates, and the Jack Ruby confession come back into the light, the cover-up cracks a little more. They killed Dorothy Kilgallen. They did not kill the question. If you want more stories like this, the real history behind the headlines, the hidden machinery behind power, and the people who got silenced for seeing too much, stay with us. Because around here, we do not stop at the official version. We do not bow to the polished lie. And we do not forget the people they buried to protect the story. Thank you for watching. From Pizzaverse Studios, a Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. We appreciate you. Stay sharp. And keep your eyes on the people smiling while the room goes dark. Dorothy Kilgallen. Listen, this wasn't just some society brought in pearls. Dorothy Kilgallen was a top-tier investigative reporter hiding in plain sight as a TV celebrity. Big brain, sharper instincts, and balls most reporters didn't have. She covered major murder trials, publicly challenged the Warren Commission, got a private interview with Jack Ruby. Yeah, that Jack Ruby. And then she winds up dead under mysterious circumstances, real convenient. Carlos Marcello. This guy, real piece of work. Carlos Marcello was the boss of the New Orleans crime family. Not flashy, not loud, but dangerous as hell. Ran gambling, narcotics, political corruption. And here's the kicker. He hated the Kennedys with a passion, got deported by RFK, came back furious. This ain't a guy who sends warning letters. This is a guy who solves problems permanently. Jack Ruby. Yeah, the random patriot. Sure, and I'm the Pope. Jack Ruby ran strip clubs in Dallas, had connections to cops and mob guys, walks into a police station, and shoots Lee Harvey Oswald on live TV. And we're supposed to believe that's spontaneous? Dorothy didn't buy it, neither should you. John F. Kennedy. The face everybody remembers, young, charismatic, all-American image. But behind that, Cold War pressure, organized crime connections floating around politics, a presidency that ended in Dealey Plaza. The official story says one guy did it. A lot of people ain't buying that. Robert F. Kennedy. This one, he made enemies. RFK declared war on organized crime, targeted bosses directly, went after Marcello personally. You humiliate a guy like Marcello, you better sleep with one eye open. Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone gunman. That's the official label. But claims he's a patsy. Gets killed before trial. Case gets wrapped up real quick. Too quick, if you ask me.
You ever sit there thinking, gee, I wish I had a completely illegal underground gambling empire? Yeah? Well, congratulations, sweetheart. Now you can. Introducing. Because why work a 9 to 5? One official lucky numbers notebook, already filled with random digits, fake winners, and just enough confusion to keep everybody playing. 50 pre-printed betting slips. We even spill a little coffee on them for that real street feel. One collector's envelope, perfect for cash, AOUs, and excuses like, "Don't worry, your number's coming tomorrow." A tiny voice recorder that whispers, "The house always wins, pal." But wait, there's more. Order now and we'll throw in the cop payoff calculator. Just punch in your weekly earnings, your level of panic, and boom. It tells you exactly how much to slide across the table. Warning. May cause sudden wealth, unexpected attention, visits from guys named Sal, and one very angry Dutch guy, not responsible for raids, betrayals, or friends suddenly wearing wires. Listen, you didn't hear this from me, but in Harlem, it ain't about luck. It's about who's holding the book. The Harlem Numbers Starter Kit. If you're gonna play the game, run it. And if things go sideways, you never met me. Capisce?
Smoke in the sky again, so I'm getting high again. Take another hit to the diaphragm. I never drew the diagram, how to deal with this shit, so I still and lie again. Whoa, you're my dream, you're my nightmare. Life is a bitch, she don't fight fair. Leave you right there, I was hoping that you'd notice my despair. Run away from the pain, I don't care. Cause first day in sight, the violence. Turn around and medicine, spend money for the hell of it. I don't give a fuck what they selling like I'm celibate, no. And I know I'm a piece of shit, should've learned by now. Peace needed quick or a piece of it. In school they ain't teaching it. Each of us trying to find release, but it seems a bit slow. First day in sight, the violence. Turn around and then they invite the silence. Burn it down. I think I need some guidance. The kids don't stand a chance. No, the kids don't stand a chance. Whatever you selling, I'm a sick joke. My president's a felon and I can't cope. I'm in love with the pain, so I stick poke with my kin folk. Give me drink, smoke. Whatever you selling, I'm a